Royal Guard Abuse Story. First section. Prince Alexander stood on the marble balcony of his private chambers, watching the morning training session unfold in the courtyard below. The royal guards moved through their drills with precision and discipline, their armor gleaming in the early sunlight. But Alexander's attention wasn't focused on their impressive formations or combat skills. Instead, he watched with calculating eyes, planning how he could make their lives more miserable than they already were at 25 years old. Prince Alexander had earned a reputation throughout the kingdom for his cruel treatment of servants, guards, and anyone else unfortunate enough to serve under his authority. Unlike his father, King Robert, who was known for his fairness and respect toward all subjects, Alexander seemed to take pleasure in humiliating those who couldn't fight back. The royal guards bore the worst of his abuse, strapped between their sworn duty to protect him and their human dignity. The morning's entertainment would begin with the weapons inspection, Alexander's favorite opportunity to find fault with the guards' equipment and appearance. He had developed an elaborate system of impossible standards that no one could possibly meet, ensuring that every inspection resulted in punishment for multiple guards. Alexander would examine sword blades for microscopic scratches, check armor for tiny dents that were invisible to normal eyes, and demand explanations for where patterns that were inevitable results of regular use. Captain William Stone, the most senior guard assigned to Alexander's protection detail, knocked respectfully on the prince's chamber door. Stone was a veteran of 15 years' service, decorated for bravery in 3 different border conflicts, and respected throughout the military for his tactical expertise. But none of his accomplishments mattered to Prince Alexander, who treated him like a common servant deserving of contempt rather than honor. Alexander deliberately kept Captain Stone waiting outside his door for 20 minutes while he finished dressing slowly and reviewed correspondence that could easily have waited until later. This was another of his regular humiliation tactics, making guards stand at attention for extended periods while he attended to trivial matters. The prince enjoyed knowing that these professional soldiers had no choice but to endure whatever treatment he decided to impose. When Alexander finally opened the door, he immediately began criticizing Captain Stone's appearance. The captain's uniform was immaculate, his weapons properly maintained, and his bearing perfectly military. But Alexander found imaginary problems with everything, claimed the captain's sword belt was positioned incorrectly, criticized the angle of his ceremonial plume, and demanded to know why his boots weren't polished to a higher shine. Each criticism was delivered in a tone of disgusted disappointment, as if Stone had personally failed the entire kingdom. The weapons inspection proceeded exactly as Alexander had planned. He rejected perfectly serviceable swords for having fingerprints on their blades, criticized shields for scratches that were barely visible, and found fault with armor maintenance that exceeded military standards. Guard after guard was subjected to lengthy lectures about their supposed inadequacies, while their comrades were forced to watch and wait their turns for similar treatment. Sergeant David Mills, a young guard who had recently joined Alexander's detail, made the mistake of attempting to explain that his sword's condition met all regulation requirements. Alexander's face darkened with rage at this perceived challenge to his authority. He ordered Mills to report to the castle dungeons for a week of solitary confinement, claiming that questioning a royal prince's judgment was an act of insubordination that bordered on treason. The other guards stood in perfect formation, their faces showing no emotion despite witnessing their comrade being punished for what any reasonable person would consider appropriate professional behavior. They had learned through bitter experience that showing sympathy for Alexander's victims only resulted in becoming victims themselves. The prince's cruelty was most effective when it isolated guards from each other and prevented them from offering mutual support. Alexander's abuse extended far beyond formal inspections and ceremonies. He would summon guards at all hours of the night for trivial tasks that servants could easily handle. Guards found themselves polishing floors, carrying messages that could have been sent through normal channels, and standing watch over empty rooms while Alexander entertained himself elsewhere. These assignments were designed to exhaust and demoralize rather than serve any legitimate security purpose. The prince also enjoyed creating impossible tactical situations during training exercises, then punishing guards when they failed to achieve unrealistic objectives. He would design scenarios where guards were outnumbered 10-1 and expected to achieve total victory without casualties. When these exercises inevitably ended in simulated defeat, Alexander would rage about the guards' incompetence and order additional punishment. Training that pushed men to the edge of physical collapse, Captain Stone had repeatedly attempted to address Alexander's behavior through proper channels, submitting formal reports to the castle's senior military leadership about the abuse occurring within the royal protection detail. But Prince Alexander was the king's son and heir to the throne, making him effectively immune to criticism from subordinates. Stone's reports were acknowledged, but no action was taken, leaving the guards trapped in an impossible situation. The psychological toll on the guards was becoming severe. Several experienced men had requested transfers to other duties, willing to sacrifice the prestige and higher pay of royal service to escape Alexander's cruelty. Others showed signs of depression and anxiety that affected their performance and threatened their ability to provide effective protection. The prince's behavior was systematically destroying the morale and effectiveness of his own security detail. Marcus Thompson, one of the newer guards, had joined the royal detail hoping to build a distinguished career in service to the crown. He came from a military family and had excelled in his initial training, earning recognition for his tactical skills and dedication. But 6 months under Prince Alexander's command had left him questioning whether he wanted to continue his military career at all. The breaking point came during a state dinner when foreign diplomats were visiting the kingdom. Alexander decided to demonstrate his authority by publicly humiliating Captain Stone in front of the international guests. He accused the captain of failing to properly secure the dining hall. Despite the fact that Stone had implemented security measures that exceeded standard protocols, the accusation was baseless and clearly motivated by Alexander's desire to assert dominance rather than address any genuine security concern. Alexander ordered Captain Stone to personally taste every dish being served to the royal family, claiming this was necessary because the captain's security arrangements were inadequate to prevent poisoning. This was traditionally a servant's duty, forcing a decorated military officer to perform it in front of foreign dignitaries was an intentional humiliation, designed to demonstrate the prince's absolute power over his subordinates. Captain Stone complied with the order without protest, maintaining his professional dignity despite the obvious insult. But the foreign diplomats were clearly uncomfortable witnessing such treatment of a military officer who should have been respected for his service and sacrifice. Several ambassadors exchanged concerned glances, recognizing that they were seeing something inappropriate and disturbing rather than normal royal protocol. The incident with Captain Stone during the state dinner marked a turning point in how others within the castle viewed Prince Alexander's behavior. Word spread among the staff, nobility, and visiting dignitaries that the prince's treatment of his guards had crossed lines that even absolute monarchy didn't justify. The abuse was becoming impossible to ignore or excuse as merely strict discipline or high standards for royal service. King Robert began receiving subtle reports about his son's conduct from various sources within the castle. Loyal servants, concerned nobility, and even some of the foreign diplomats who had witnessed the state dinner incident found ways to communicate their concerns without directly challenging royal authority. The king found himself facing the uncomfortable reality that his heir was developing a reputation for cruelty that could damage monarchy's standing both domestically and internationally. Royal Guard Abuse Story. Second section. The situation escalated dramatically 3 weeks after the state dinner incident, when Prince Alexander's cruelty reached new heights during what should have been a routine security briefing. Captain Stone had prepared a comprehensive report about potential threats during the upcoming Harvest Festival, including detailed recommendations for crowd control and dignitary protection. Alexander listened to the presentation with visible impatience, interrupting repeatedly with dismissive comments and irrelevant questions. Designed to undermine the captain's authority, when Captain Stone mentioned concerns about increased criminal activity in the lower districts that might affect festival security, Alexander exploded with rage. He accused the captain of incompetence for allowing crime to exist within the kingdom, as if a royal guard could somehow prevent all criminal behavior. Throughout the realm, the prince's reaction was so disproportionate to the situation that even his most loyal servants began to recognize something was seriously wrong with his judgment and temperament. Alexander ordered Captain Stone to personally patrol the lower districts alone for the next week, investigating every reported crime and arresting all perpetrators single-handedly. This assignment was not only impossible for one man to accomplish, but also violated every principle of tactical security by removing the most experienced guard from the prince's protection detail. The order demonstrated that Alexander's desire to punish Captain Stone had completely overcome any concern for his own safety or the kingdom's security. The other guards watched in stunned silence, as their respected leader was assigned what amounted to a suicide mission disguised as a legitimate duty. Captain Stone accepted the order without protest, maintaining his professional composure despite understanding that Alexander was essentially sending him into the most dangerous parts of the kingdom without backup or support. The captain's quiet dignity in the face of such obvious persecution only made Alexander's cruelty more apparent to everyone present. That same evening, Alexander summoned guard Marcus Thompson to his private chambers for what he claimed was a security consultation. Marcus had hoped this might represent an opportunity to demonstrate his tactical knowledge and perhaps earn some recognition for his service. Instead, he found himself subjected to a bizarre interrogation where Alexander questioned his loyalty, competence, and right to serve in the royal guard. The prince accused Marcus of plotting against the royal family, citing as evidence the fact that Marcus had been observed talking quietly with other guards during off-duty hours. Alexander claimed this was suspicious behavior that indicated possible conspiracy, completely ignoring the fact that guards naturally discussed their duties and shared professional concerns with their colleagues. The accusation was so absurd that Marcus initially thought the prince might be testing his reactions or playing some elaborate game. When Marcus attempted to explain that his conversations with fellow guards were entirely professional and appropriate, Alexander accused him of lying and showing disrespect to royal authority. The prince ordered Marcus to confess his treasonous intentions and name his co-conspirators among the other guards. When Marcus truthfully insisted he had no treasonous intentions or knowledge of any conspiracy, Alexander declared this denial was proof of his guilt and sophisticated deception. Alexander's paranoia seemed to be escalating beyond rational control. He began seeing threats and conspiracies in every normal interaction between guards, interpreting professional communication as evidence of plots against his life. The prince started keeping detailed notes about which guards spoke to each other, how long their conversations lasted, and what topics they discussed. This surveillance created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that made it nearly impossible for the guards to function effectively as a protective unit. The psychological pressure on the guards intensified when Alexander began implementing collective punishment for individual infractions. If one guard made any mistake or failed to meet the prince's impossible standards, the entire detail would be punished with extra duties, reduced rations, or forced to stand watch for extended periods without relief. This strategy was designed to turn the guards against each other and prevent them from developing the mutual trust that effective military units required. Sergeant Mills, who had been released from solitary confinement but remained under suspicion for his earlier question about sword maintenance, found himself subjected to constant scrutiny and harassment. Alexander would assign him the most dangerous and degrading duties while claiming this was necessary to test his renewed loyalty to the crown. Mills was forced to taste all food intended for the prince's pets, check the temperature of his bathwater by immersing his hands in it, stand guard over Alexander's empty chambers while the prince was elsewhere in the castle. The abuse reached a shocking new level when Alexander decided to stage a mock execution to terrorize a guard who had allegedly failed to salute with sufficient enthusiasm. Guard Robert Hayes was dragged to the castle courtyard, where an executioner's block had been set up as if for an actual beheading. Alexander forced the other guards to watch while Hayes was made to kneel and place his head on the block. waiting in terror while the prince delivered a lengthy speech about the penalties for disrespecting royal authority. The mock execution continued. For nearly an hour, with Alexander periodically signaling the executioner to raise and lower his axe, while Hayes remained motionless with his head on the chopping block. The psychological torture was so extreme that Hayes lost consciousness twice, from fear, and had to be revived so the ceremony could continue. The other guards were forced to maintain perfect formation throughout the ordeal. Knowing that showing any reaction would result in their own punishment, Alexander seemed to derive genuine pleasure from the terror he was inflicting, smiling and laughing as Hayes trembled uncontrollably and begged for mercy. The prince made jokes about how easy it would be to actually complete the execution, speculating about whether anyone would really miss one insignificant guard. The sadistic entertainment continued until Alexander finally grew bored and ordered Hayes to return to his duties as if nothing unusual had happened. The mock execution incident marked a point of no return in the relationship between Prince Alexander and his guards. Even the most loyal and disciplined soldiers began to question whether they could continue serving someone who seemed to view their lives and dignity as nothing more than sources of personal entertainment. The professional respect and loyalty that guards traditionally felt for their royal charges was being systematically destroyed by Alexander's increasingly extreme behavior. Captain Stone returned from his impossible patrol assignment, bearing multiple injuries and having made no arrests, exactly as everyone had expected. The lower districts were controlled by organized criminal groups that no single guard could hope to challenge, and Stone had been fortunate to escape with his life after being recognized and targeted by hostile elements. Alexander refused to acknowledge the impossibility of the mission, instead criticizing Stone for his failure to clean up the entire criminal underworld single-handedly. The captain's injuries included a knife wound to his shoulder, severe bruises from multiple confrontations, and exhaustion from a week of sleeping outdoors while attempting to patrol areas that were unsafe for lone guards. But instead of receiving medical attention and rest, Stone was immediately assigned to organize security. For the upcoming Harvest Festival, with no assistance or recovery time, Alexander claimed that Stone's injuries proved he was becoming weak and incompetent, unfit for continued leadership of the Royal Guard. Marcus Thompson began documenting the abuse in a private journal, carefully recording each incident of cruelty and humiliation that he witnessed. He wasn't sure what he intended to do with this information, but some instinct told him that preserving an accurate record might become important. Marcus wrote in code and hid the journal in a secret location, understanding that discovery would result in severe punishment or possibly even the real execution that Alexander had only pretended to carry out on Hayes. The Harvest Festival preparations became another opportunity for Alexander to demonstrate his power through arbitrary and contradictory orders. He would approve security arrangements one day and completely reverse his decisions the next, forcing the guards to constantly redesign their plans and redeploy their resources. The constant changes made effective security planning impossible, while creating numerous opportunities for Alexander to criticize the guards for failing to implement his conflicting directives successfully. During one particularly cruel incident, Alexander ordered Guard Thompson to personally test the structural integrity of a festival viewing platform by jumping up and down on it repeatedly until either the platform collapsed or Thompson was too exhausted to continue. The platform was designed to hold hundreds of people and was obviously safe, but Alexander claimed he needed personal assurance of its stability from someone whose life was expendable. Thompson jumped for over 2 hours until he collapsed from exhaustion, providing Alexander with the entertainment he had been seeking. The guard's breaking point was approaching rapidly as Alexander's behavior became increasingly unpredictable and dangerous. Professional soldiers who had faced enemy armies without fear found themselves terrified of their own prince, never knowing what new humiliation or punishment he might devise. The atmosphere within the Royal Guard had become toxic, with fear and desperation replacing the pride and honor that had once motivated these men to excellence in their service. Royal Guard, Abuse Story, 3rd Section, The Morning of the Harvest Festival brought an atmosphere of tension and dread among the royal guards that was completely at odds with the celebration happening throughout the kingdom. Citizens gathered in the streets wearing their finest clothes, children ran between the market stalls with excitement, and merchants displayed elaborate decorations to honor the successful growing season. But within the castle walls, the guards prepared for what they knew would be another day of Prince Alexander's unpredictable cruelty disguised as royal duty. Alexander had spent the previous evening devising new ways to torment his guards during the public festivities. He announced that any guard who made even the smallest mistake during the festival would be publicly stripped of rank and expelled from service in front of the gathered crowds. This threat was particularly cruel because it would not only end the guards' careers, but humiliate them before their own families and communities who had come to celebrate the harvest. Captain Stone attempted one final appeal to Alexander's sense of reason, requesting a private meeting to discuss the security arrangements and express concerns about the guards' ability to function effectively under the current conditions. Stone had prepared carefully for this conversation, hoping to find some way to communicate with whatever remained of Alexander's rational judgment beneath his increasingly erratic behavior. The meeting took place in Alexander's private study. Surrounded by portraits of previous kings who had ruled with wisdom and justice, Captain Stone spoke with quiet dignity about the guards' dedication to protecting the royal family and their willingness to sacrifice their lives in service to the crown. He explained that effective protection required mutual respect and trust between guards and their charges, qualities that were being systematically destroyed by the current treatment. Alexander listened to Captain Stone's appeal with apparent interest, occasionally nodding and asking questions that suggested he might be reconsidering his behavior. For a brief moment, Stone allowed himself to hope that he had reached something human within the prince, some remnant of the decent person Alexander might have been before his cruelty consumed his character. The captain concluded his presentation with a respectful request that the guards be treated with basic human dignity, befitting their service and sacrifice. The prince's response shattered any hope for reasonable discussion. Alexander accused Captain Stone of threatening him and attempting to incite rebellion among the guards. He claimed that Stone's appeal for better treatment was actually a veiled ultimatum designed to force the royal family to submit to the guards' demands. Alexander declared that Stone's very presence in his study constituted an act of treason that could legally result in immediate execution. Captain Stone realized that Alexander's condition had deteriorated beyond any possibility of rational discourse. The prince was interpreting normal professional communication as evidence of conspiracy and viewing requests for basic respect as threats to royal authority. Stone understood that Alexander had become genuinely dangerous, not just to the guards under his command, but potentially to the kingdom itself if his paranoia and cruelty continued to escalate unchecked. Alexander ordered Captain Stone to be confined to the castle dungeons immediately, claiming that his treasonous behavior required investigation by royal interrogators. The captain was stripped of his weapons, rank insignia, and ceremonial decorations before being dragged away by guards who were forced to arrest their own respected leader. The sight of Stone being led away in chains shocked even the castle servants, who had witnessed months of Alexander's increasingly extreme behavior. With Captain Stone imprisoned, Alexander assumed direct command of the royal guard for the harvest festival, despite having no military training or experience in security operations. He immediately began issuing contradictory orders that demonstrated his complete ignorance of protective tactics and crowd control procedures. Guards were assigned to positions that made effective communication impossible. Backup plans were eliminated, and emergency response protocols were abandoned in favor of Alexander's arbitrary decisions. Marcus Thompson found himself promoted to temporary leadership of the guard detail, not because Alexander recognized his abilities, but because the prince wanted someone inexperienced who wouldn't question his orders. Marcus accepted the responsibility with deep reluctance, knowing that he would be blamed for any problems that developed during the festival. While having no real authority to implement effective security measures, the festival's opening ceremony proceeded despite the chaos in the guard ranks. with thousands of citizens gathering to hear King Robert's traditional address. Celebrating the successful harvest and the kingdom's prosperity, the king appeared genuinely happy to connect with his subjects, showing none of his son's contempt for the common people. Alexander stood beside his father with a forced smile, playing the role of dutiful heir while internally seething at having to share attention with anyone else. During the ceremony, Alexander began implementing his planned torments of the guards. In full view of the public crowds, he loudly criticized guards for minor imperfections in their positioning, ordered them to repeatedly adjust their formations for no apparent reason, and made disparaging comments about their competence that were clearly audible to nearby citizens. The public humiliation was designed to destroy the guards' dignity while demonstrating Alexander's absolute power over them. Guard Robert Hayes, who had endured the mock execution weeks earlier, finally reached his breaking point during Alexander's public harassment. When the prince ordered him to polish his boots in front of the crowd while remaining at attention, Hayes quietly but firmly refused to comply. The refusal was stated respectfully and professionally, but it represented the first direct defiance of Alexander's authority that any guard had shown. Alexander's reaction to Hayes' refusal was explosive and immediate. He screamed accusations of mutiny and treason, claiming that Hayes' disobedience proved the existence of a conspiracy among the guards to overthrow royal authority. The prince demanded that Hayes be arrested and executed immediately for his treasonous act of refusing to polish boots during a public ceremony. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Alexander worked himself into a rage over what seemed like a minor disagreement. But Hayes' act of defiance had an unexpected effect on the other guards. Instead of isolating him for punishment, they began moving closer together in a subtle display of solidarity. The guard after guard stepped forward to stand beside Hayes, not speaking, but making their support clear through their positioning and body language. What had begun as one man's refusal to be humiliated was becoming a collective statement that the guards would no longer tolerate Alexander's abuse. Marcus Thompson faced the most difficult decision of his military career as he watched his fellow guards unite in quiet rebellion against their tormentor. As temporary commander, he could order them to disperse and return to their assigned positions, potentially preventing the situation from escalating further. But he could also choose to stand with them, accepting the consequences of defying royal authority, but refusing to participate in the systematic destruction of his unit's dignity and effectiveness. The crowd of festival attendees began murmuring among themselves as they witnessed the confrontation between Prince Alexander and his guards. Many citizens had heard rumors about the prince's cruel treatment of his servants and soldiers, but this was their first opportunity to see his behavior directly. The contrast between Alexander's rage and the guards' quiet dignity was stark and obvious to everyone present. King Robert noticed the disturbance and began moving toward his son to investigate what was causing the disruption to the ceremony. The king's approach added another layer of tension to an already explosive situation, as everyone present understood that the confrontation was about to escalate to the highest level of royal authority. Whatever happened next would determine not only the fate of the guards involved, but potentially the future relationship between the royal family and the military forces sworn to protect them. Alexander continued, ranting about treason and conspiracy, while the guards maintained their silent solidarity with Hayes. The prince's accusations became increasingly wild and disconnected from reality, causing visible concern among the watching crowd and even some of the noble families present for the ceremony. It was becoming obvious to everyone that Alexander's behavior was not the result of legitimate authority being challenged, but rather the product of an unstable mind that had lost all sense of proportion and justice. The moment stretched endlessly as Marcus Thompson weighed his options, and the assembled guards waited to see whether their temporary commander would support them or abandon them to Alexander's wrath. The decision would define not only Marcus's character, but the future of the entire Royal Guard unit. In the silence before the storm, everyone present sensed that they were witnessing a turning point that would change everything about how power was exercised and challenged within the kingdom. The Harvest Festival had become the stage for a confrontation that no one had anticipated, but that had been building for months through Alexander's systematic abuse and the guards' growing desperation. The unexpected turn was about to reveal itself, though none of the participants could have predicted the specific form it would take or the consequences that would follow from this moment of collective defiance against tyrannical authority. Marcus Thompson stepped forward and placed himself directly between Prince Alexander and Guard Hayes, a move that shocked everyone present, including Marcus himself. In that split second, he had made the decision to stand with his fellow guards rather than enable Alexander's continued abuse. The action was subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus was using his temporary authority to protect Hayes from the prince's wrath, rather than facilitating the punishment Alexander demanded. The prince's face turned red with rage as he realized that his own appointed commander was defying him. Alexander screamed at Marcus to arrest Hayes immediately and execute him for treason. But Marcus remained motionless, his expression calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around him. The temporary commander's quiet defiance sent a clear message to both the guards and the watching crowd that someone was finally willing to stand up to Alexander's tyrannical behavior. King Robert reached the confrontation just as Alexander was, threatening to have Marcus executed alongside Hayes for his insubordination. The king took in the scene quickly, his son screaming hysterically at professional soldiers who stood in quiet dignity. The crowd of citizens watching with obvious concern and the atmosphere of crisis that had developed during what should have been a peaceful celebration. Robert's expression grew increasingly troubled as he began to understand the situation. Alexander immediately began explaining to his father that the guards were in open rebellion and needed to be crushed immediately to preserve royal authority. He claimed that Marcus and Hayes were leading a conspiracy to overthrow the monarchy in Molac, that their defiance during the public ceremony was proof of their treasonous intentions. Alexander demanded that both guards be arrested and publicly executed to make an example that would prevent further rebellion among the military forces. But King Robert was an experienced ruler who had dealt with genuine military crises throughout his reign, and he could distinguish between real threats and manufactured drama. The guards' behavior showed none of the characteristics of actual mutiny or rebellion. They remained in formation, kept their weapons sheathed, and showed respectful deference to royal authority, even while quietly supporting their comrade. Actions seemed more like a plea for justice than a challenge to the crown. The king requested a private explanation from Marcus about what had precipitated the confrontation, and Marcus provided a calm, factual account of the events leading up. To Hayes' refusal to polish Alexander's boots, Marcus carefully avoided criticizing the prince directly. But he described the situation in terms that made Alexander's unreasonable behavior obvious to anyone listening objectively. The contrast between Marcus's professional report and Alexander's hysterical accusations was stark and revealing. King Robert then called for Captain Stone to be released from the dungeons and brought to the festival immediately. Alexander protested frantically, claiming that Stone was a dangerous traitor who would incite further rebellion if allowed to appear in public. But the king overruled his son's objections and ordered castle guards to escort the captain to the ceremony with full honors restored. Alexander's desperation to prevent Stone's release suggested that the captain's testimony might reveal truths that the prince desperately wanted to keep hidden. Captain Stone arrived within minutes, still bearing the injuries from his impossible patrol assignment, but maintaining the dignified bearing of a professional soldier. The crowd murmured approvingly when they saw the respected officer, many recognizing him from previous public ceremonies where he had served with distinction. Stone's obvious injuries and the circumstances of his recent imprisonment began to paint a clearer picture of Alexander's treatment of his guards. The king asked Captain Stone to provide his assessment of the situation, and Stone delivered a masterful summary of events that was both truthful and respectful of royal authority. He described months of escalating abuse and impossible demands, the systematic destruction of unit morale and effectiveness, and the growing desperation among guards who remained loyal to the crown but could no longer endure the treatment they were receiving from Prince Alexander. Alexander attempted to interrupt Stone's report multiple times with accusations and threats, But King Robert silenced his son with a stern look that reminded everyone present of the difference between legitimate, royal authority and petty tyranny. The king listened intently as Stone described the mock execution, the collective punishments, the impossible assignments, and the atmosphere of fear that had replaced the pride and honor that should characterize royal service. The crowd's reaction to Stone's testimony was immediate and obvious. Citizens who had revered their royal family began muttering angrily about Prince Alexander's behavior, expressing shock that decorated soldiers were being treated like criminals rather than honored protectors. The harvest festival was supposed to celebrate the kingdom's prosperity and unity, but Alexander's actions were creating division and unrest that threatened the monarchy's relationship with its subjects. King Robert found himself facing the most difficult decision of his reign. His son and heir had clearly abused his authority in ways that violated every principle of just leadership. But publicly disciplining Alexander would acknowledge royal fallibility and potentially damage the monarchy's prestige. Yet ignoring the situation would implicitly endorse Alexander's behavior and might lead to genuine rebellion among military forces who could no longer trust their future king. The unexpected turn came when Alexander, sensing that public opinion was shifting against him, decided to escalate the confrontation dramatically. He drew his ceremonial sword and pointed it at Marcus Thompson's chest, declaring that he would personally execute any guard who continued to defy his authority. The act of drawing a weapon on his own protectors shocked even Alexander's supporters, and crossed a line that made his unfitness for leadership impossible to deny. The crowd gasped at the sight of their prince. Threatening to murder one of his own guards during a public ceremony, parents pulled their children closer while nobles began backing away from the royal platform, recognizing that they were witnessing something that could easily spiral into violence and chaos. The festival atmosphere evaporated completely as citizens realized they might be in danger from their own royal family. Marcus Thompson remained perfectly still with Alexander's sword point at his chest, showing the kind of courage under pressure that exemplified the best qualities of royal service. His calm dignity in the face of Alexander's threats created a powerful visual contrast that made the prince's instability even more obvious to everyone present. Marcus had become a symbol of professional honor, standing against tyrannical abuse of power. King Robert acted swiftly to prevent the situation from deteriorating further, commanded Alexander to sheath his weapon immediately, using the tone of absolute royal authority that brooked no argument or delay. The king then ordered palace guards to escort the prince back to his chambers, effectively removing him from the public ceremony while avoiding the humiliation of a public arrest. Alexander's protests and threats continued as he was led away, but his power to intimidate the guards had been broken by his father's intervention. With Alexander removed from the scene, the atmosphere began to calm as King Robert addressed the crowd directly. He acknowledged that there had been problems in the administration of royal duties and promised that justice would be served for those who had been wronged. The king's words were carefully chosen to restore confidence in royal authority while implicitly criticizing his son's behavior without stating it explicitly. Captain Stone was publicly restored to his full rank and authority, with King Robert personally apologizing for the treatment he had received and commending his continued loyalty despite the injustices he had endured. Marcus Thompson was officially confirmed as Stone's deputy. Recognition for his courage in standing up for his fellow guards when leadership was desperately needed. The other guards were praised for their professionalism and dedication in difficult circumstances. The harvest festival continued, but the mood had changed completely. Citizens celebrated not just the successful crops, but also the restoration of justice and proper leadership within the royal guard. The guards themselves seemed transformed, standing taller and prouder as their dignity and honor were publicly restored. The unexpected turn had revealed that even royal authority had limits when it conflicted with basic human decency and justice. Private conversations among the noble families and foreign dignitaries present at the festival centered on Prince Alexander's fitness to inherit the throne. His public breakdown and threat to murder his own guards had demonstrated instability and cruelty that raised serious questions about the kingdom's future leadership. King Robert would need to address these concerns if he hoped to maintain confidence in the monarchy's continuation. The guards' quiet act of solidarity had achieved something that seemed impossible just hours earlier. It had successfully challenged abusive authority without resorting to violence or rebellion, maintaining their loyalty to legitimate royal power while rejecting tyrannical behavior that violated their basic dignity. Their courage had exposed Alexander's unfitness for command and created an opportunity for justice to be restored. The days following the harvest, festival confrontation brought sweeping changes throughout the castle as King Robert conducted a thorough investigation into Prince Alexander's treatment of the royal guards. Testimony from dozens of witnesses, including servants, guards, nobles, and foreign diplomats, painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse that had escalated far beyond anything the king had imagined. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Alexander's few remaining supporters could not defend his actions. Marcus Thompson's hidden journal became crucial evidence in the investigation, providing detailed documentation of specific incidents that corroborated the testimony of other witnesses. The careful record-keeping that Marcus had maintained out of instinct proved invaluable for establishing patterns of behavior and demonstrating that Alexander's cruelty had been deliberate and sustained rather than isolated incidents or momentary lapses in judgment. King Robert personally interviewed every guard who had served under Alexander, giving them permission to speak freely about their experiences without fear of retaliation. The stories that emerged were worse than anyone had suspected, revealing not just physical and psychological abuse, but also deliberate attempts to destroy the military effectiveness of the Royal Protection Force. The entire royal family by systematically undermining the guards' ability to provide effective security. The investigation also revealed that Alexander's abuse had extended beyond the guards to include servants, stable workers, and even some lower-ranking nobles who had been unfortunate enough to interact with him regularly. A pattern emerged of someone who derived pleasure from exercising power over people who couldn't fight back, suggesting deep-seated psychological problems that went far beyond simple arrogance or immaturity. The scope of Alexander's cruelty shocked even experienced court officials who thought they had seen everything. Foreign diplomats who had witnessed various incidents provided testimony that was particularly damaging to Alexander's reputation and the kingdom's international standing. Several ambassadors reported that their governments had begun questioning whether Prince Alexander would be a reliable ally if he inherited the throne, given his demonstrated instability and cruelty toward his own people. The diplomatic implications of Alexander's behavior threatened to isolate the kingdom internationally. Captain Stone worked closely with King Robert to develop new protocols and oversight mechanisms that would prevent future abuse of royal authority over military personnel. The reforms included regular inspections by independent military officers, formal channels for reporting misconduct, and clear consequences for anyone who violated the basic rights and dignity of those serving the crown. These changes represented a fundamental shift in how the monarchy understood its relationship with the military forces that protected it. King Robert recognized that effective security required mutual respect and trust, qualities that Alexander's behavior had systematically destroyed. The new protocols would ensure that guards could serve with honor and dignity while maintaining their absolute loyalty to legitimate royal authority. Prince Alexander was confined to his chambers under constant supervision, while King Robert consulted with senior advisors about how to address his son's unfitness for leadership. The prince's behavior had created a succession crisis that threatened the stability of the entire kingdom. Traditional royal protocol provided no clear guidance for dealing with an heir who had proven himself mentally unstable and cruel beyond acceptable limits. The guards themselves underwent a process of rehabilitation and restoration designed to repair the psychological damage caused by months of systematic abuse. Professional counselors worked with individual guards to help them recover their confidence and sense of purpose. Group sessions allowed guards to discuss their experiences openly and support each other's healing process. The goal was to restore the unit's effectiveness while addressing the trauma that Alexander's cruelty had inflicted. Marcus Thompson found himself in an unexpected position of leadership and respect within the Royal Guard community. His decision to stand up to Alexander had inspired other guards to find their own courage. and his careful documentation of the abuse had provided crucial evidence for the investigation. King Robert formally appointed Marcus as Captain Stone's permanent deputy, recognizing both his analytical abilities and his moral courage under pressure. The restoration process wasn't immediate or easy. Many guards struggled with trusting authority figures again after months of being betrayed and humiliated by someone they were sworn to protect. Some requested transfers to other duties, unable to continue serving in an environment that reminded them of their suffering. Others needed extensive counseling before they could function effectively in their protective roles again. But gradually, the Royal Guard unit began to recover its strength and pride. Training sessions resumed with focus on mutual respect and professional development rather than arbitrary punishment and humiliation. Guards who had been isolated by Alexander's divide-and-conquer tactics rediscovered their sense of brotherhood and shared purpose. The unit's effectiveness improved dramatically as fear and suspicion were replaced by trust and collaboration. The investigation's findings were compiled into a comprehensive report that King Robert shared with senior military leaders throughout the kingdom. The document served as both an acknowledgement of past failures and a blueprint for preventing similar abuses in the future. Military commanders at all levels were required to study the report and implement similar oversight mechanisms within their own units. Public reaction to the investigation's revelations was swift and decisive. Citizens who had previously viewed Prince Alexander as their future king began demanding that he be removed from the line of succession, recognizing that his character defects made him unfit to rule over people he clearly despised. Petitions circulated throughout the kingdom, calling for Alexander to be stripped of his royal titles and exiled from the realm entirely. The international community also responded to news of Alexander's behavior with concern and condemnation. Allied kingdoms began questioning their treaty relationships with a realm whose future leader had demonstrated such instability and cruelty. Trade relationships suffered as foreign merchants worried about conducting business under Alexander's eventual rule. The diplomatic damage threatened to isolate the kingdom economically and politically. Religious leaders throughout the kingdom spoke out against Alexander's actions, citing moral and spiritual principles that condemned the abuse of power over those who served faithfully. Several prominent bishops declared that Alexander's behavior violated fundamental teachings about justice, compassion, and responsible leadership. Their moral authority added weight to the growing consensus that Alexander was unfit for the throne. Captain Stone proposed creating a new specialized unit within the Royal Guard, focused on preventing internal threats and monitoring for abuse of authority. This unit would operate independently of normal command structures and report directly to the king, ensuring that future problems could be identified and addressed before they reached crisis levels. Marcus Thompson was selected to lead this new unit, recognizing his proven ability to identify threats that others missed. The guards who had suffered under Alexander's abuse received formal recognition for their endurance and continued loyalty. Despite the injustices they had experienced, King Robert personally presented commendations to each guard, acknowledging their sacrifices and thanking them for maintaining their professional standards under impossible conditions. The ceremony served both to honor their service and to publicly demonstrate the crown's respect for military personnel. Alexander's confinement continued as medical experts evaluated his mental condition and legal scholars researched precedents for removing an heir from succession. The prince showed no remorse for his actions and continued to insist that the guards had been treasonous for questioning his authority. His inability to recognize the wrongness of his behavior convinced many that his problems were too severe to be corrected through counseling or education. The Harvest Festival, which had begun as a celebration and nearly become a tragedy, was remembered throughout the kingdom as the day when justice triumphed over tyranny. Through the courage of ordinary people who refused to accept abuse, Guard Hayes became a folk hero, whose quiet refusal to be humiliated had sparked a movement that restored honor and dignity to military service. Marcus Thompson's transformation from confused recruit to respected leader inspired other guards throughout the kingdom who had struggled with traditional expectations but possessed different types of valuable abilities. Training programs began incorporating lessons about diverse forms of courage and service, recognizing that effective protection required various skills and perspectives rather than uniformity. The unexpected turn had revealed itself not as a single dramatic moment, but as a gradual awakening of collective courage among people who had been systematically oppressed. The Guards' quiet solidarity had accomplished what individual resistance could never achieve, demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful response to tyranny was unified refusal to participate in one's own degradation. 6 months after the Harvest Festival confrontation, King Robert made the unprecedented decision to formally remove Prince Alexander from the line of succession, declaring him mentally unfit to rule the kingdom. The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the realm, as no monarch in the kingdom's history had ever taken such drastic action against his own heir. But the evidence of Alexander's cruelty and instability, so overwhelming that even traditional supporters of absolute monarchy recognized the necessity of this extreme measure. The formal ceremony removing Alexander from succession took place in the Great Hall, with representatives from every major noble family, military unit, and guild present to witness this historic moment. King Robert read the charges against his son with visible sadness but unwavering resolve. Describing pattern of systematic abuse that had endangered both individual subjects and the kingdom's security, the king's voice remained steady throughout the lengthy recitation, but those who knew him well could see the personal pain this decision was causing. Alexander himself was not present for the ceremony, having been relocated to a secure facility where medical experts continued attempting to understand and treat his psychological condition. Reports from his caregivers indicated no improvement in his mental state or recognition of the wrongness of his previous behavior. The prince continued to insist that he had been betrayed by treasonous guards and that his father was making a terrible mistake that would destroy royal authority throughout the kingdom. Princess Catherine, King Robert's younger daughter, was formally named as the new heir to the throne, despite traditional preferences for male succession. The decision reflected both the exceptional circumstances created by Alexander's unfitness and Catherine's own demonstrated competence in administrative and diplomatic roles. Her first official act as heir was to visit the Royal Guard barracks and personally thank the guards for their service and sacrifice during the difficult period under Alexander's command. The impact of Catherine's visit to the guards was profound and emotional. Many of the men who had endured months of systematic humiliation found themselves moved to tears by the simple experience of being treated with respect and dignity by a member of the royal family. Catherine listened intently to their stories, asked thoughtful questions about their experiences, and demonstrated genuine concern for their welfare and professional development. Captain Stone was promoted to Chief of Royal Security, a new position created to oversee all aspects of protecting the royal family and preventing future abuses of authority. His first major initiative was establishing a comprehensive training program for all castle personnel about recognizing and reporting misconduct by authority figures. The program emphasized that true loyalty to the crown required protecting the monarchy from internal corruption and abuse that could destroy its legitimacy. Marcus Thompson's new internal security unit proved its value quickly by identifying and preventing several potential problems before they could develop into serious threats. The unit's success demonstrated that Marcus's analytical abilities and moral courage had found their proper application in protecting both individual subjects and institutional integrity. His transformation from failed traditional guard to innovative security specialist became a model for developing diverse talents within the military structure. The guards who had suffered under Alexander's abuse received ongoing support through counseling programs, medical treatment for their injuries, and opportunities for career advancement that recognized their extraordinary service under impossible conditions. Many chose to remain with the Royal Guard, finding renewed purpose in serving under leadership that valued their contributions and treated them with appropriate respect. Others accepted transfers to different positions where their skills could be utilized effectively. The kingdom's international reputation began recovering as word spread about How King Robert had addressed the succession crisis and implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent future abuses. Foreign diplomats praised the king's courage in taking decisive action against his own son, recognizing that protecting individual rights and institutional integrity required difficult personal sacrifices. Trade relationships gradually resumed as international confidence in the kingdom's stability was restored. Princess Catherine implemented additional reforms designed to create more transparent and accountable governance throughout the kingdom. She established regular forums where citizens could raise concerns about official misconduct, created independent oversight bodies to monitor government performance, and instituted systematic reviews of all policies and procedures that affected individual rights and dignity. These changes reflected lessons learned from Alexander's abuse about the importance of preventing corruption before it could take root. The Harvest Festival became an annual celebration not just of agricultural success, but of the triumph of justice over tyranny and the courage of ordinary people who refused to accept abuse. Guard Hayes, whose simple refusal to polish boots had sparked the confrontation that exposed Alexander's cruelty, was honored as a national hero whose moral courage had saved the kingdom from potentially disastrous leadership. His story was told throughout the realm as an example of how individual integrity could catalyze broader social change. Training programs throughout the kingdom's military forces incorporated case studies of the Royal Guard crisis, teaching future leaders about the importance of treating subordinates with respect and the dangers of allowing abuse to escalate unchecked. The reforms emphasized that effective leadership required earning loyalty through competence and character, rather than demanding obedience through fear and intimidation. Marcus Thompson married Sarah, castle administrator who had supported the guards throughout their ordeal and helped document evidence of Alexander's abuse. Their wedding celebration was attended by guards, nobles, and common citizens alike, symbolizing the unity and mutual respect that had emerged from the crisis. Marcus's journey from incompetent recruit to respected leader became a popular story that inspired others who struggled to find their place within traditional structures. Captain Stone retired after 5 more years of distinguished service, knowing that the Royal Guard had been fully restored to its proper role as protector of the crown and servant of the people. His farewell ceremony was attended by King Robert, Princess Catherine, and hundreds of guards whose lives had been improved by his leadership during the recovery period. Stone's legacy included not just the specific reforms he implemented, but the broader principle that military service required moral courage as well as physical bravery. The secure facility where Alexander lived remained his home for the rest of his life. His medical experts concluded that his psychological condition was too severe for him ever to be safely released or integrated into normal society. He continued to believe that he had been wronged by treasonous subordinates and never acknowledged the harm his behavior had caused to others. His story served as a cautionary tale about how unchecked power could corrupt even those born to privilege and responsibility. Princess Catherine's eventual coronation as queen was celebrated throughout the kingdom as the culmination of the reforms that had begun during the Royal Guard crisis. Her reign was marked by continued emphasis on accountable leadership, protection of individual rights, and the principle that authority must be exercised with wisdom and compassion rather than cruelty and caprice. The guards who had suffered under Alexander's abuse served with pride at her coronation, knowing that their courage had helped bring about this transformation. The unexpected turn in Prince Alexander's abuse of the Royal Guard had revealed itself as a catalyst for comprehensive reform that strengthened both the monarchy and the kingdom as a whole. What began as individual acts of cruelty had ultimately led to systemic changes that protected all subjects from similar abuse and established new standards of ethical leadership that would guide the realm for generations to come. The guards' quiet courage had not only saved themselves, but had saved their kingdom from the disaster of tyrannical rule.